Hey everyone, I'm Chad Cannon. I'm the composer for the Netflix documentary American Factory. I'm here today on Film.Music.Media talking with Kaya.
Oh, awesome, Chad. How are you doing this morning? How are you doing?
I'm good.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. It's such an honor.
Yeah, likewise.
So yeah, to start off, I would love to kind of know, going back to kind of I guess Chad's origin story, kind of going back to your childhood. What were those kind of first moments that you remember music kind of coming into your life, and at what point did it become not just an interest or a hobby, but you wanted to pursue this as a career?
Well, first of all, music came into my life rather forcefully. I had a very strict mother who required practicing every single day from, when I was age 4. She had me start on violin.
Oh wow.
I started on the Suzuki method. Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was this Japanese, teacher who believed that music was like a language, and so kids should start learning it before they could read and write. And so that was the method that brought me into music. And it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 that I realized I actually liked it.
So you were kind of apprehensive at it at first, almost like a chore.
Yeah, I mean, I was always kind of a passionate person and kind of bossy to other people. I was the youngest of 6 siblings, so I think I
Oh,
was with adults a lot. So
yeah,
I was
yeah.
always, why don't these other kids get what adults think? But when I was 12, my violin ensemble had a chance to go to Chicago and perform at this big conference, a big Suzuki conference. And that was the first time that I realized music could sort of be a bridge to the world. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, which
Mm.
is not super rural or anything, but it wasn't like New York City. So going to Chicago with my violin kind of opened a lot of doors for me as far as my imagination and what music could be in my life. And then later on in high school, I discovered film music specifically, largely thanks to the fact that I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan. So Howard Shore was a big influence in my life, even though I didn't really know that's who it was until a little bit later.
Right, I remember those days where you're attached to the music, but then you start kind of putting the names to them, and you go, "Wait, who's this person?" And then you start discovering their entire filmography.
Exactly, yeah.
So did you, when you discovered film, you had music, you kind of growing this passion. Did you always want to become kind of a composer for visual media, or was it just I want to write concerts, I want to write symphonic music, and when did it become like I want to become a composer for film and TV?
Well, long before I wanted to become a film composer, I wanted to be a rock star.
Yeah.
I was, my brothers, introduced me to all the rock bands of the 80s, 90s, 70s, 60s even. They had this huge CD collection in our basement, so I would listen to a lot of stuff. My first concert that I went to was Billy Joel.
Nice.
Saw them at the Delta Center, which is the old name for where the Utah Jazz used to play. I mean, they still play there, but the arena name has changed. But I really fell in love with U2,
Oh,
the
nice.
rock band, and I really wanted to be Bono. So I actually started a rock band in high school that was basically a U2 imitation band. We did play a lot of U2 cover songs, but I wrote a lot of songs as well. We recorded stuff in my mom's basement. Um, so that experience actually, I think, is the most direct link to what I am now, which is like, film composers are not just composers. You're also a music producer. I
Right.
didn't realize that until I got into it, that a lot of what I do is produce. It's not just writing. Um, and so, yeah, I really wanted to become a rock star first, and then I sort of discovered that, hey, I don't really understand how to get from this key to that key, and hey, how did the Beatles do that? And so I started thinking about music theory, and that actually led me back into classical music more
Mm.
intensely. I got really into contemporary concert music, and that's what I studied in college.
Right. I mean,
Yeah,
you went to
and I-
Harvard and Juilliard. You got some good education there.
yeah, I had great teachers at both of those institutions, and very different kinds of music education at both schools. Juilliard's a very performance and American focused
Mm,
institution,
right.
whereas Harvard has a lot of European influence and it's very much, it's much more academic. A lot of experimental music being written at Harvard. So I kind of got the best of both worlds, I would think, between those two schools. But yeah, so I wasn't set on writing for visual media necessarily, but I think deep in my heart, ever since my Lord of the Rings fandom days, which aren't over, by the way.
They're never over. They're
They're
never
never,
over.
yeah.
So yeah, after school, I think a lot of young folks just find themselves in this position of what to do next. So, I mean, what did you do next after school? What were kind of the first jobs you had? Did you move to LA? I know you spent some time in Japan and in Asia. I mean, what were the kind of next steps in your journey?
Yeah, so a little context there. I grew up in a Mormon family,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this culture slash expectation that especially Mormon men, and now it's Mormon women as well, will serve a mission for the church. So you go and do volunteer work for the church for 2 years. And I just happened to get sent to Japan, even though I had studied German and Spanish, and I never had studied Japanese. In fact, the only connection I had to Japan was Dr. Suzuki from when I was young.
Right.
And I didn't even really realize I knew basically nothing about Japan, but my mission experience really changed me. I became I fell in love with Japan. I got to know the culture really well. And when I got back to Harvard, I really wanted to keep Japan as part of my career path.
Mm.
So I ended up working for Midori Goto, who's a famous Japanese violinist, on her music charity projects in Asia. So I went with her on 8 separate tours
Wow.
where we went and performed in hospitals and schools and refugee camps all over Asia, Myanmar, Nepal, Bangladesh, and a bunch of times in Japan itself. And I was doing that while I was a student at Juilliard, and then also while I started working here in LA right after I graduated. So in answer to your question, my next step after I graduated school was I actually moved to LA and I started working for Conrad Pope.
Oh yeah, Conrad. I love Conrad.
Yeah, I had a mutual connection to him through Phil Klein, who is a family friend of my wife's family. And Phil Klein's another fabulous composer,
Yeah.
by the way. He just had a big film come out called The Last Full Measure,
Right. Right.
which everyone should check out. It's a gorgeous score. But while I was working for Conrad, I was developing all these connections in Asia while I was working with Midori. So Midori actually introduced me to Joe Hisaishi, knowing that I was into film music. And of course, Joe Hisaishi is the composer for all the Studio Ghibli Miyazaki animated
Absolutely.
films.
Yeah.
And he's a fantastic musician and conductor, and that has become a relationship that I've treasured deeply because he's taught me so much. He started hiring me as an arranger and orchestrator, so I got to work firsthand with him and with his handwritten scores
Wow.
and transforming those into these symphonic suites, which then he performs for his live concerts.
Absolutely. Wow.
So yeah, my path has sort of been all over in some ways, but the general gist of it has been, I really love film music, but I also love live concert performance music or film music in live concert settings. And so I've sort of kept a foot also in Asia as well as the U.S.
Absolutely. I mean, and
while
now, yeah.
while pursuing those goals. So.
And you got to work on some amazing films as an arranger and an orchestrator, and you got to, of course, work with through Conrad, I guess, on Alexandre Desplat, and you worked with Howard Shore as well, right?
Yeah, through Conrad again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that must have been a pretty awesome moment since you're such a huge fan of Howard's.
Yeah. Yeah, I was sort of in shock when Conrad called and said, "Hey, we have this little gig with Peter Jackson and Howard Shore," and I was like, "Holy shit!" I tried to play it cool, but I think Conrad knew, this is a big deal.
Yeah. So did that kind of give you a lot of the groundwork so when you started doing your own solo work, were you a little bit more confident maybe in your abilities to tackle something like your own film?
Absolutely. So watching the process, hearing Howard's mock-ups go from mock-up, MIDI mock-up orchestration into the score, into watching Conrad conduct the live recordings, and then seeing how that ended up in the films, that taught me a lot about how the film music process works,
Yeah.
especially in the context of live recorded, scores. So definitely the skills that I got, especially using instruments that I don't play myself, such as woodwinds, brass, percussion, that was just an education, much better education than whatever I was taught in school,
Yeah. You can't get better than that.
Yeah, so that really definitely built my confidence up so that, when a film like American Factory came along, I felt very confident that I could write a woodwind heavy score that actually was, not a piece of crap. Well, hopefully.
No, it's
Hopefully
not.
people pick it
It's
out.
a beautiful score and a fantastic film. And so yeah, let's talk about American Factory. How did that kind of come to you? Did you have to pursue it? Did somebody reach out to you?
So in 2016, I was really fortunate to be selected to be part of the Sundance Composer Labs.
Right.
I had applied a few years in a row, which I think is pretty typical because it's such a competitive program, and they kind of keep an eye on you as
Yeah.
you apply over the years to see how you progress. And I had scored this Japanese Hiroshima themed film called Paper Lanterns.
Yes.
And that score for me was the first time I feel like I really found my own voice. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm still trying to find my voice. I think we always are until we die, maybe. But
No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
that film was the first time I came across this sound that I felt, wow, that really feels like me. And I put my whole soul into that film because I really cared about the project and the story that was being told. It's this beautiful story about an A-bomb survivor who's Japanese who found out while he was young that there had been 12 American POWs, prisoners of war, that had been killed by the atomic bomb. And Americans didn't know this. Like
Wow.
most Americans have no idea that 12 Americans also died in that bomb.
Yeah.
And I was just so touched that this man would spend his life reaching out to the families of the 12 Americans who died in Hiroshima. So in response to hearing his passion for his, mission in life, I really wrote music that came from deep inside me.
Yeah.
And that's the first time that had really happened in the context of film for me. So when I had applied to Sundance, I really focused on this Paper Lantern score because I felt like, hey, this is actually me. I feel like it's a unique sound that I've been able to uncover, and I think the committee, I guess, felt that yeah, this is something unique. So they let me into the program. And the Sundance labs are fantastic. I encourage any young composers listening to this to apply to them. The lab experience really transformed me because, it gave me an opportunity to experiment in the context of being around other young composers who are experimenting also,
Right.
and directors and sound designers there. And so you really get a chance to push the limits of what you're used to doing, and also it gave me so many more insights into storytelling, specifically nonfiction storytelling, because I had done the documentary labs, which now I think they're combined into one. But it used to be that there was a doc labs and a feature labs.
Okay.
But sorry, long story short, the Sundance Labs people had remembered that I had this strong Asia connection. So when they had heard that there was a film coming up about a Chinese billionaire buying a factory in Ohio, and the whole film was going to be about this cultural clash or cultural exchange,
Right.
I think they remembered me and referred me to the directors, Steve Bogner and Julia Reichert. So that was the connection. The Sundance Labs is where I made the connection with the directors.
So yeah, yeah, you had two great directors with Steven and Julia. What were the kind of initial discussions about music at the start? Was it what was the approach that they wanted, and what did you want your music to achieve in this documentary?
Interestingly, the first thing they said to me was, and this has probably never been said in the history of any director composer combo was, we want a lot of woodwinds in this score. And I was like, what? That's so unusual. I mean, I was happy, but apparently Julia had gone and seen, as a classical concert in Ohio recently, with where there had been on the program a Mozart woodwind serenade
Mm.
that was, very reed heavy, like lots of bassoons, lots of oboe, and French horn, and then like two double basses or something. And she was just really taken in by that sound, and she had this insight that, hey, I think this like woodwind reedy sound is going to work well against all the factory sounds that are in
Right.
the film, because the factory itself is really, really loud. There's all this machinery, and it's just this giant hall that amplifies all that,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the physical challenges all these workers have is that, you go in there day after day and your ears are just tired, right? Like,
yeah.
and the sound designer had actually gone to the factory for 3 days and recorded all these, machines, and he made a whole library of factory sounds, which
Wow.
he actually shared with me when we first started working. And in the end, I think Julia was right that this woodwind, there's something about the organic feel, the woody feel of the woodwinds that works well against all this glass and machinery and
Mm.
metal and cement that you hear in the film. So I credit her for that, for basically making the instrumentation choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned on Paper Lanterns how you became so kind of emotionally invested in the subject matter. Do you find that to be really? I mean, of course, I would think it would be very helpful from a storytelling point of view. Did you find that was the same way for this film? Did you feel an attachment, or did you have to kind of work your way into it?
The film, to their credit, they've created a film that, like, even if there wasn't a single note of music in it, it's a really compelling story.
Yeah.
And the characters you meet, it's just really obvious that the Julia and Steve have a deep love and respect for every single person they filmed in this movie. They weren't out to like expose
Right.
some. It's not an expository
Yeah.
documentary like, you know um, Michael Moore style or something.
Right.
It's really all about. They really spent years with these people, watching their employment situation unfold and kind of getting a sense for who they were as individuals. And that same thing applies to the billionaire, who's the main kind of cavalier figure in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
They spent a lot of time with him, with their Chinese producers there, of course, helping to translate and everything. But um, that also touched me, that like Julie and Steve care so much about these people. And then also personally, I have this passion for cultural exchange and having people meet face to face so they understand each other and become friends.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a couple characters in the movie that really do that. I don't know if you've seen the film, but there's this Chinese guy named Wang who comes from Fujian province. He's worked for Fuyao Glass for like 25 years or
Right.
something.
Right. Yeah.
And then they send him to Ohio, where he's away from his family and kids with no additional pay. He just has to go. And he is like such a good guy. He
Yeah.
really makes friends with some of the other American workers. And in particular, there's this guy named Rob who ends up getting fired in the end. But he Rob is like even-headed enough to, level-headed enough to like see beyond the fact that he got fired. He still
Yeah.
really cares about the people he met, and he learned a lot from them. He has this very positive, optimistic worldview. And so this friendship between Rob and Wong like really touched me, and that's probably the story in the film that I became most emotionally attached to.
Yeah.
Um, and but the difference between Paper Lanterns and this film was, well, there's many differences obviously, but
Right.
the biggest one for me was just the timeline. Like, we were so crunched for time getting American Factory finished in time to have it premiere at Sundance.
Right. Right.
Compared to how long, say, the Lindsay Utes, the editor, was on the film. She was on the film for like a year and a half.
Wow.
and on the film for like less than 5 months, you know.
Yeah,
So just the amount of time you have with the subject matter makes a big difference.
absolutely.
Uh,
Um,
but
oh no, sorry, go ahead.
just last thought is, but nevertheless, that I could tell that this film was going to have a very positive impact in the world, and so in that sense, I was emotionally invested, and I tried um, to make that come through in the score. One of the challenges in this movie, though, of course, is the number of cues. There's a lot of starting and stopping,
Mm,
and whereas in Paper Lanterns, I like basically the director kind of wanted music almost the whole time.
mm.
Whereas in this film, it's like, okay, we need 30 seconds here, 45 seconds there. I think there's like 35 cues in the movie.
Wow.
So it's a lot of short cues, you know, and it's a little harder to like have that feel like an even arch from beginning to end when you have so many starts and stops, you know. But
Yeah, absolutely. But just kind of looking at whether it's American Factory or Paper Lantern or anything, any the documentaries genre as a whole, what should a doc score do, and what shouldn't it do? Is it any different than scoring a fictional narrative? I mean, how I know you're dealing with real people, real lives. Do you feel more of a, I guess you don't want to get too overindulgent and too big?
yeah, you have to be. I think we talked about this when you moderated the panel at Comic Con
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
San Diego discussion we had. But um, yeah, I mean, it's not Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, right? Like, I mean, in some ways, this story in particular kind of is because it's like this huge. What the film is about individuals, but in the end, it's about this gargantuan thing that's happening between the United States economy and the Chinese economy. I mean,
Yeah,
it's other than like climate change, it's probably the biggest story of the 21st century, right? Like
absolutely. Yeah.
in terms of sheer numbers of people involved and the impact it has on the lives of pretty much everyone on Earth because of the environmental impact that also comes from that relationship. Um, but that said, obviously, like you can't put a Darth Vader theme on the billionaire to make him look like
Oh, you
you
could. You just might get a weird reaction from
know.
people.
Yeah, I mean, you get the point though. It's got
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
like you have to walk this line between yeah, you want to get people into it and you want to convey emotion, but you can't what's the word they use like editorialize
Yeah.
to put your own you can't like I don't personally know most of the people in this movie. I did get to meet some of them after the film came out, but you know, it's their story, not mine.
Right. You
So
can't project yourself too much into it. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So I mean, the film has such an amazing response, and it's on Netflix. So if anyone hasn't watched it, check it out. And of course, it's from High Ground Productions, which is from Barack and Michelle Obama. So I mean, it's really an important film, and it's covering some really important subject matter. And you guys got nominated for an Oscar. I mean, what was your reaction when that happened?
I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, obviously there were um, indicators that we might be one of the nominees eventually because you know it kept doing well at all these other
Right.
indicator awards, the Gotham Awards, the IDA Awards. Um, but from my perspective, the sad thing about the Oscars is that more people didn't get nominated because there's so
Yeah.
many amazing docs this year. Like One Child Nation, I really recommend people watch
It's
that.
amazing.
That film blew me away. Apollo 11.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, there's so many docs this year that people should watch. But that said, of course, it's really exciting, and it just means that more people will get to see the film or be triggered to be interested in watching the film, which of course just raises the impact of the whole story. And I think this film is one that needs to be seen. I mean, like whether you're a business school student, an economist, or you're like an elementary school student and you're sort of wondering how the world works as far
Yeah.
as like what is a factory and why are all my toys made in China? You know, it's like
Right.
pretty much anyone on earth who watches this will learn something, you know, so it's a very positive film that way. Like I don't think it distorts the truth at all. I think
Hmm.
it's one of these few docs that like really tells the truth.
Right. Just being kind of subjective and covering everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's on, we mentioned that it was on Netflix, and I just wanted to get your perspective on, because streaming, of course, is exploded, and everyone's either on Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, and I really do think that's been such a great thing for documentaries, because I feel like I'm watching more documentaries. I know my wife is watching more of them. People I talk about is watching more of them. Do you think? I mean, you mentioned One Child Nation. I think that's on Amazon, but are
Yeah.
are people? Do you think this is a good thing for the genre, that people are experiencing more of this, of documentaries?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the reasons Steve and Julia and the team decided to go with the Netflix offer, they had offers from a bunch of different, or at least from what I heard, they had
Mm-hmm.
a lot of opportunities to sell this film to whoever, but they ended up going with Netflix because, in part, because Netflix has this thing where um, they allow you to like put on community screenings of the film at no
Mm.
charge.
Oh wow, yeah.
I can't tell you all the specifics of that program, but there was something like that, and I know they're doing like social good screenings of this film all over the country, and also just the fact that it makes it accessible to the people who are being portrayed in the film,
Yeah.
like these workers in the middle of Ohio who wouldn't be able to go to the art theaters in like Cambridge, Massachusetts,
Yeah.
or Lincoln Center in New York. Like they don't have access to all these awesome docs, that are being shown in the big cities, but
Right, right.
it's hard to see, niche films in your small town. So that's another reason they chose to go with Netflix, is the accessibility for everybody to be able
Absolutely.
to see it. And to your point about docs being more, readily watchable by so many people, yeah, I myself am watching more docs, and I think it raises the profile of documentaries vis-a-vis the, big budget blockbuster
For
films,
sure.
which I think is a really good thing.
I do
Because,
too. Yeah, I think it's great that, that we're getting more saturated with this kind of content, and it's such a fantastic documentary, Chad. And I want to congratulate you on it. And the score is beautiful. The film turned out so amazing, and hopefully next time we talk, it will have an Oscar to its name. So
well, we'll see. I mean, whoever wins deserves it. I mean, the 5 nominees this year and the 15 shortlists
yeah,
and
they're all great.
dozens of other films that didn't get the shortlist, all those people would have been equally deserving. But
Absolutely. So if you live in a city that sometimes they'll do documentary marathons for all the nominees, I'd urge anyone to go out and check them. I know ArcLight sometimes does it, Lamely, all these folks. So,
yeah,
but
the Lemley in Santa Monica, I think, is showing this week.
yeah, yeah. And of course, if you have Netflix, you can check it out there too, in the
Yeah,
comfort of your own home in your PJs.
definitely.
Chad, again, I want to thank you for chatting today. It was so much fun, and always a pleasure.
Likewise, thanks for all the storytelling you're doing with film composers.
Oh, no worries.
It's
It's,
another form of documentary work.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to. That's how I look at it a little bit.
It really is, and stories that most people don't hear too much about film composers. So I think it's really cool that you're doing that.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for, I guess, taking the time today. I know how busy you are and how busy everyone is, so I always appreciate the time. And
Yeah, likewise.
and I'll hopefully we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, Kaya.